Hello and welcome to another Thursday live. Yes, another Thursday is here, and we are going to go for to continue to dissect this topic that I know makes quite a few parents uncomfortable, right? I know that this topic might make some people feel attacked because there are so many parents who hang on to yelling as though their lives depend on it. And if that is you, then you are not alone. Remember, I'm not here to attack you. I'm not here to to stress you out. I'm here to actually show you that calm parenting is possible, that parenting can be enjoyed. Parenting can be enjoyable. It should be enjoyable. It should be fulfilling, right? That's one of the things that I truly believe about parenting, that parents can actually look forward to going back home, look forward to spending time with their children, no matter the age, whether they are toddlers or they are middle-aged kids or teenagers, right? It doesn't matter the age at which your child is, parenting can be enjoyable. So once again, you're welcome to this session. And today we're going to be talking about why yelling doesn't work. Yes, again, this is one of the things that, like I said at the very beginning, so many parents hang on to it, right? That's all they know. And usually when all you know is being pulled out from beneath you, it might feel like you're being attacked. It might feel like, this is not something that you want because this is all you have. And if you have to be told that what all you know, all you're doing, or what you do most of the time is not actually working, it can be scary. But again, that's why we have sessions like this to look at not only why it doesn't work, but also what to do instead. What should you be replacing your yelling with that will be more beneficial for you, for your children, and most importantly, help you accomplish what it is that I know every parent wants to be heard, to get your kids to listen, right? And finally do the things that you're asking them to do. So we're going to look at why it doesn't work. But before we even get into that, right, I'd like us to start with something very honest, and that is the fact that yelling is easy, right? It's just like having some kind of tool that is always on your hand and you can just use it. It's like the multi-purpose tool because many parents use yelling for almost every difficult situation that they encounter, right? The kids are getting late in the morning, you yell. The kids are not doing what you ask them to do, you yell. You're in traffic, you're yelling. You're just yelling, yelling everywhere. Because for most people, yelling becomes a multi-purpose tool where they use it every time they encounter difficulties, every time things are not going the way they want, every time they are frustrated, they tend to use this multi-purpose tool. So it's pretty common, right? Especially in our culture here. It gets you quick results. That's the truth about yelling. No matter where you are, the moment you start yelling, let's say, for example, you are stuck in a service or some institution somewhere and you're not getting served right. The moment you start yelling, the administration, those who are in charge, actually give you attention because you are commanding attention. But the truth is, it attracts negative attention. The kind of attention you get when you yell is not the kind that is beneficial over the long run. So yelling may make parenting easier in the moment, but it will make it harder in the long run. It may make it easier. It does make it easier in the short run. It does make it easier in the now, right? The moment you raise your voice, your kids jump up and they start doing whatever it is you said they should do. The moment you raise your voice, your child stops doing the annoying thing they were doing and you've been saying stop, stop, and the child is not listening. The moment you raise your voice, all those things come to an end. That's why, like I said, it's a very common go-to tool for many parents where they're using it multi-purposely for every single thing. So if imagine that you're using this tool for every single difficulty you encounter as a parent, you find yourself always yelling, constantly yelling. You find yourself yelling even over things that you shouldn't be yelling at. You find yourself in a situation where you feel helpless, even with your own yelling. When you don't want to yell, you find yourself yelling, right? I've had many parents share with me, oh, I've gotten to the point where even when I'm really trying not to shout, I just can't help it. Before I even know it, I'm really raising my voice without even realizing that the tone of my voice has gone up. So yelling makes parenting harder and less enjoyable. Because imagine at the end of a long day, maybe let's say you've been at work, you're tired. The thought of having to go home because you know you're going to have reasons to yell can actually make you delay. You're like, oh God, you don't look forward to it. Why? Because you know you're going to have reasons to yell. So it makes parenting harder. It makes it less enjoyable because you're constantly going to find different causes that will trigger your yelling, and you're going to find yourself constantly upset, constantly just your voice is raised all the time. In fact, I've had a parent tell me that the neighbors usually don't need to ask when they're around or whether they're not around, because whenever they are around, there is the constant yelling. All right. I think a parent had jokingly said this to me about how their neighbor had to comment on the fact that they have changed. Like, what's happening? Now I cannot even tell when you're home, because at first I would just need to listen to, hear for your voices yelling, and I'll know that you're home. But for a while now, I've not noticed, I don't hear the yelling, even though I know that you're home. I don't hear the yelling anymore. What's happening? So those around you will notice when you start doing the work to reduce your yelling. So, but here's one thing I want you to think about or to reflect on when it comes to yelling. If yelling really did work, right, you wouldn't need to use it all the time. If it really did work, you wouldn't need to use it as often as you're finding yourself using it. Because if it did work, then just once or twice, a couple of times will be enough. You will not need to yell over the same issues over and over and over and over and over. That should get you thinking. If you're doing the same thing and yet you're expecting different results, then something is wrong with the whole of that setup right there. Because if you're constantly yelling and yet you're constantly facing the same thing, think about it, right? Think about those reasons why you yell all the time. Maybe they have left the shoes lit at the front of the house. Maybe they have eaten and not cleaned up the table. Maybe they've not done chores again. Maybe you come and the living room is messy. Think about the things that cause parents to yell often, right? If yelling really did work, in the sense that we think it does, which is why we constantly keep going back to it. Because the reason you constantly use it because you believe that it does work. And also the fact that many don't know what else to do besides the yelling. The only way to get their kids to move is to raise their voice. But if it really did work, then it will be like a magical tool where the moment you use it, you don't need to use it over and over again. But you find that on the same day, but the same thing, have I not told you? Have I not told you? You're constantly saying, have I not told you? Did I not tell you? How many times do you want me to tell? What are those phrases we commonly use, right? Most parents always begin their yelling with, have I not told you? How many times do you want me to tell you? Didn't I tell you? Right? There are so many other versions. But every parent usually has an opening phrase for their yelling. Once that statement comes on, the kids just know that it's just going to be yelling all through. So if it really did work, then we'll not need to use it all the time. Right? We might need to use just a couple, just like a small sprinkle, and everything works. But there is something about the reason why we really need to review the whole yelling thing, is because it really doesn't work. Yes, it might give you false short-term results, but over the long term, it is not helping you the way you think it is. All right? It's not helping you the way you think it is. So that's why we need to do the work to break the cycle, because it really doesn't work and it creates struggle for you ahead on your journey. And these are the reasons, these are some of the things that parents believe about yelling that makes them continue to go back to it. All right? Many parents believe that until they yell, their kids will not take them seriously. Until I yell, my kids cannot take me seriously. And think about that phrase for a moment, right? You've told yourself that until I yell, my hi mama party, that until I yell, my kids will not take me seriously. That's a whole mindset. That means from that moment on, once you imbibe that belief, that's exactly what you're going to, that's what's going to guide your behavior. Because you're going to tell yourself that, okay, if I want my kids to take me seriously, I need to raise my voice. One of the things that my kids have noticed about me is that when I'm serious, my voice goes lower, right? It's all about the facial expression, the tone, right? The eye contact. There are so many ways that you can communicate that you're serious to your kids without necessarily having to raise your voice. And the funny thing is, the louder you raise your voice, the more your kids learn not to take it seriously. So each time you want them to take it seriously, you add the volume. So imagine how high you're going to go, right? Imagine how high you're going to go. I have parents tell me, oh, I scream until my head feels like it's going to explode. Imagine what that is doing to your health. And yet we keep going back and not trying to learn what to do to replace it. So in the long run, the first person who is affected by this negatively is you. You who is the one having the natural speaker. You're constantly talking on high volume whenever you're home, right? You're constantly trying to avoid being around your kids because you don't want to yell. Parents told me, oh, sometimes before I took this course, I used to avoid going home because I did not want to yell. So the parent is saying, when I get there, I'm helpless. There's always going to be a reason for me to yell, so I'll just be yelling, 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 yelling. All right. So yelling should not be what you're using to show that you're serious, because it's not going to last very long. Your kids will eventually get to the age where even when you're yelling, they still will not take you seriously. So in reality, that constant yelling shows frustration, but it shows the lack of maturity to manage that frustration. It shows the lack of maturity to manage that frustration. So it shows frustration, but not authority. That's not authority. If you have to yell for people to listen and follow what you're saying, then that is not authority. All right, that is not authority. So the second thing that parents often mistake, or like the second myth that drives this behavior, is the fact that many parents believe that yelling makes children listen. Yelling makes children listen. Yes, it makes them stop temporarily, but does it really make them listen? Let's go back to what I said earlier, that if yelling really did work, then we'll not need to use it over and over and over and over and over for the same thing, for the same slippers at the door, for the same plate left on the table, for the same pillows, thrown to the floor of the living room, of the sitting area. Think about the things that parents are constantly yelling over. You keep coming back to chores undone. You keep coming back to the house messy. You keep coming back to the bickering, to the fighting, to the noise over and over. So are they really listening? And you yelled about this yesterday, or maybe even the same day. You yelled about it. You yelled about it probably already twice. So does it really make children listen, or does it force them to hear but not necessarily gain understanding what it is that you're trying to accomplish? So yes, it may make them stop temporarily, but it does not teach responsibility. That's why we're going to look at what does work. Yelling is not a discipline tool. Did someone write that for me in the comments? It's not a discipline tool. Because there's so many parents who say, oh, when the child did this, I shouted at him. I yelled at the child, and they're actually saying this, to confirm the fact that I disciplined the child by shouting at the child. So I gave him a good dose. Maybe you put your highest volume of yelling. Yelling doesn't make children truly listen. Because what is listening? Listening has to do with you hearing the intended message of the person who is talking. Right? So if someone is talking to you, to say that you have listened will be to understand and act on the message, whatever it is the intent of the person who is speaking was at the very beginning. So yes, the yelling might sound that you're getting the child is like, Mama, what do you want me to do? The child is standing there looking at you because they can hear your volume. You have gotten their attention, but you have not still gotten them to the point where they can actually hear and understand what you're saying. Especially these small kids. Right? Sometimes when you start yelling so loud, they get confused, and probably the child starts even doing the wrong thing, and then you have another reason to yell. So you're like, I'm telling you to pass and go this way, and you're going the other way. It gets the child confused because yelling triggers fear, and when a child is in a state of fear, the part of their brain that can think very well, can think wise thoughts or think logical things, goes offline. They're just trying now to avoid any trouble that could be coming their way. So that is not the brain you want to address when you have a message that you want to pass. That's not the brain. That's not the part of the brain that you want to be addressing. You want to address the one that can think proactively, can think logically, can think wisely, or can think higher thoughts. Let's put it that way. So yelling does not make children listen. Yes, it forcefully grabs their attention, but it does not make them listen. Because if it truly did, then you will not need to repeat your message over and over in your yelling. It doesn't. It will exhaust you. It will frustrate you. Sometimes you're yelling and the child is looking at you like that. Which is, I believe sometimes that's why some parents actually get to the point where they actually hit the child. Because sometimes when you're yelling and you feel like your head is exploding, the child is just looking at you like that. Probably like, because truly, think about it. Think about the last time somebody yelled at you. Somehow it's hard to really hear what someone is saying when their volume is so loud, even though you're so close. They are screaming at the top of their voice and you're just like, I mean, what is this all about? So it's scary, it's confusing, and it does not address the part of the brain that you really want to address when you want your child to learn something. Yelling does not teach. It's not the language through which you teach a child. If you are constantly yelling at your kids when they make mistakes, trust me, they are not learning anything. That's why you keep getting frustrated over the same things because you're not truly teaching. Imagine a teacher in class that comes to class every day and is just shouting at everybody, trying to get the lesson into your head by yelling at you. You're going to leave that class that day with an empty head, for sure. So imagine kids who are in an environment where the parent is constantly correcting them through yelling. Is this how they wipe the floor? Look at how it's dirty. Can't you hold your rack well? And you're shouting. So the child will not learn what you really want the child to grasp or master because of the language through which you are communicating the message that you have to pass. All right. So the third mistake parents often make is thinking that yelling is a normal part of parenting. Remember, I also read my post before they got to the session. I said that yelling is a toxic parenting habit. It's a toxic parenting habit. It's toxic. Toxic because many parents get to that point where they have imbibed it from how they were raised themselves, right? Most of us were raised by parents who yelled a lot. My dad did not yell a lot. And I grew up, most of my childhood was spent with my dad. He didn't yell a lot, all right? But I come from a family where yelling is something that is very, very common. Very common. You can't escape being yelled at, especially when, you go to other, relatives' houses and stuff like that. You can't escape being yelled at. So most of us were raised with yelling. So of course, when you're yelled at, you don't like it, but you come to believe certain things about it. That's why one of the things you must do on your parenting journey is that you must review the script. I've talked about this over and again for those who've been following these sessions. You must review the script. What are the belief systems that are driving your parenting? Every parent has them. There you have your fears, you have your reservations, you have your traumas, you have your belief system, your experiences, you have those things that drive your parenting, whether you are aware of it or not. I came across a post today on Facebook, I don't know, when I was trying to put up this post, I think the first post that shot up on my feed was a post of a lady talking about how, I think her husband was recounting a story about how he was about to bathe, I think his 3 or 4-year-old daughter, because his wife was busy, so he wanted to help her by bathing the daughter. I think that was the first time he was bathing that child. And the moment he put the child in the bath and was about to start bathing the child, the mother ran from his wife, ran from the kitchen to come and say, stop, please. You cannot bathe my daughter. You cannot bathe my daughter. It's not allowed. And he was shocked. He was like, is there a law that says the father cannot bathe his daughter? And, so that reaction from her is exactly what I've been talking about, right? It's a script. It's a belief system that she has. Maybe she has endured trauma as a child. There is something behind it, all right? That reaction, because where is she from with that idea? So there are certain things that we go through that shapes how we see things, shapes how we respond to things, shapes what we believe, that feeds our belief system. And yelling is one of those things. Most of us come from it. We have endured it, and we say we did not die. So it just naturally flows in our own parenting. But that's why I want us to reason together, right? Look at the effect of the yelling. Think about your own self as a child. Your parents were maybe yellers, right? And I'm sure you'll agree with me that you became very good at hiding. There were things you would never dare do in front of your parents, show to your parents, talk to your parents about it, because you know that they will give you a good yelling match. So that alone should tell you that if you want to raise a child, particularly in this day and age, right, where there is a lot that children have to battle with, 50 million times more than we had to deal with. Every time I look at my kids, I'm like, wow, they are growing up in a time. Compared to us, ours was child's play. What kids have to deal with today, what parents have to prepare their children for, is so much more than anything that we ever had to deal with growing up. So you want, above everything, to create build a relationship of trust with your child. Because there is a lot, you cannot see everything, right? You cannot know everything. You need your child to be able to give you that feedback. I tell parents often that feedback is gold. It's gold on your parenting journey, right? You need to leave the door open so your child knows that they can come in when they need to. So yelling is not a normal part of parenting. It is a toxic habit driven by the silent belief that it's not possible to parent without yelling constantly. That is even possible. Parents laugh and say, what do you mean by 28 days of no yelling? Is it even possible to go for 1 day? Yes, it's possible to go for 1 day without yelling. It's possible to go for 28 days. It's possible to go for months without yelling. And I am a testimony to that. It's possible. And I have, by, worked with a good number of parents who can say the same, that it's possible. It's possible for yelling to become something that is strange for you. Yes, it's possible because it is not a normal part of parenting. It is a toxic habit, one that you need to work to eliminate, one that you need to work to overcome. It's possible, right? It's possible. And it is worth it for your health, for your kids. There are so many positive reasons why you need to do the work to break the cycle of yelling. So why does yelling not work? You've heard me say at the very beginning, a very bold statement, right? I'm sure some of you are rushing and say, "Ha! What do you mean by it doesn't work?" Let me go and hear what she has to say anyway, right? How can she say that this thing that gets my kids running like that is not working? Well, again, it depends on what you mean by working, right? What I mean by working, what you understand by working. When we say yelling doesn't work, does it mean that it doesn't get you any result? Of course not. Yelling is a quick fix. It gets them moving like now, now, now. But for me and for you, hopefully, right, what you really want on your journey is not just the now, now, now results, but you want long-term gain, right? Purposeful parenting is beginning from with the end in mind. You begin with the end in mind. So it's about asking yourself, if I'm patching now with my yelling, what happens when I'm not there? What happens as they grow? How is this going to affect the kind of children I'm raising? How will it affect our relationship? Right? You want to think about those long-term things because it's easy to get lost in your present convenience that you forget to think about what happens 10 years down the line. What happens 5 years from now? If all my child learns to do is to only obey when I yell, then you are in for trouble because you are creating a child who will depend on external motivation to do what needs to be done. That's why you keep yelling. So it really doesn't work. So I'm going to give you 5 reasons why it doesn't work. All right. Now, the first reason why yelling doesn't work is because it loses power over time. I'm sure most of you can also tell. At some point, you got used to your parents yelling. Yes, it makes you uneasy, but as you grew older, it never affected you as much as it did when you were younger, right? It never, yes, it feels uncomfortable, it makes you feel uneasy, but as you grow older, if you were raised by a parent who was chronically yelling, you will agree that over time, the fear you had for your parents yelling began to reduce to the point where you can say, they will only shut up. You go only holler me. As we say in Pidgin, you go only holler me now, all that. You go pass. So we say things like that, right? That's all that is going to happen. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? I'll only get yelled at and it's going to pass. So some kids begin to adapt to their parents yelling very early on. That's why the parent needs to keep increasing the volume or add physical aggression because the yelling is no longer working. So it loses power over time. Children begin to adapt to the volume. They begin to adapt to the verbal aggression to the point where you need to add something extra. And it's exhausting. You cannot enjoy parenting that way. You're going to end up with the belief that parenting is something that is such a nuisance or is so uncomfortable and inconveniencing. Because if you have to do that all the time just to get your kids to do what needs to be done, I mean, where is the fun in that? Right? Where is the that's so stressful. I'm talking as someone who has been there, right? I've been there. I know what it feels like. The story. I think my stories are very popular here online. I've talked about it for those who be following me anyway. My community, I've shared about it severally. How they extend the limits of my yelling, the heights of my yelling. It is stressful to constantly need to do that for your kids to get to do the things that they need to do. Because children are children, they're going to give you several reasons to want to yell. So it loses power over time and you end up yelling louder, more often. Neighbors are always hearing you. These children, can I not rest? So you begin to feel like parenting is a burden. It's not a burden, it's not meant to be a burden. The only reason why it's burdensome for you is because you insist on using methods that are exhausting, draining, and that suck away all the joy from parenting. Because kids will always be kids. They will make mistakes, they will make messes, they will forget stuff, they will cross lines intentionally, they will do stuff that will give you. So you will have, if it's for reasons for yelling, you will never lack. There will always be reasons for yelling. There will always be reasons for yelling. So you cannot keep excusing your yelling behind the fact that but the kids they keep doing things that are annoying me. So that's your excuse. The reason you are constantly yelling is because your kids keep doing things that annoy you. So you're saying that you are a slave to your children's actions. Whatever they do that annoys you pushes you to yell. So you have no control over it. But that's not the truth. All right. So it loses power over time, and you find yourself yelling for the same issues over and over and over because it doesn't teach, it doesn't make children listen. It forces their attention, but it doesn't really make them listen. The second reason why it doesn't work is because it trains your children to wait until you yell. I don't know if you've noticed this, right? A parent who constantly yells, I'm sure you can agree with this. You get to the point where you're talking, come and go and take that pot from there and put, on the other side. You said it the first time. They have heard you. Nobody's moving. Second time, you call again. Can someone please take this thing? And you're talking nicely. You're asking nicely. They can hear you very well. Nobody's still moving. By the third time, you're already irritated. And that's when you start yelling. And by the time you start yelling, everybody starts jumping up. Everybody starts jumping up. So why didn't your kids wake up the first two times you called, or you asked them to do it nicely with your normal conversational voice, maybe just at a raised volume? That's not yelling, right? You're talking at your kids from a distance, so it's not the same as yelling. Nobody moved until when they could sense that now there is anger mixed inside, there's frustration mixed inside, there's trouble coming. When you start the yelling, that's when somebody comes to come say, so I must shout. Every time I must shout. Exactly. Because that is the unintentional training you've given to your children. They have learned that mom is not or dad is not serious until he gets to the point where we can sense irritation and anger in their voice, until we get to the point where the volume goes up, we can sense the verbal aggression. That's when we need to get up and go. So we need to wait until it gets to that point before we take them seriously. And trust me, that is going to frustrate you. Because to keep doing that, that's training you're giving your kids. It means the first time you said it, you were not serious. The second time you said it, you were not serious. The third, fourth, when you began to yell, that is when your children know, if you don't take your mom or dad seriously, something else is going to happen. So that's not a good message, because that is exactly what external motivation is all about. So the kids will wait until you give them a reason to want to do what it is that you're asking them to do, not just because, out of honor you've asked. So it trains kids to wait until you yell, which makes parenting burdensome, which makes it frustrating. So instead of responding to calm instruction, they learn to delay to that point when they can sense your irritation. Then they jump, because they know that after that a slap will come, or after that, something will happen. So this, like I said earlier, it makes your children to depend on external motivation. What's external motivation? I mean, that's something that will come from outside to get them to do what it is that they have to do. And that makes it stressful. That makes it burdensome. One of the things I teach parents so passionately is about the fact that you need to raise your child to become skillful at self-leadership. To be internally, there's nothing more powerful than internal motivation. Because if you constantly have to drive your child with your yelling, with the beating, with all the things that you're doing on the outside, if that's the only thing that gets your child moving, then you should be worried. Why? Because when you're not there, how does a child get driven? I constantly talk about how in society today we see a lot of adults. Let's just say for those who are like business owners, right here in Africa in particular, you see a lot of adults who, once the boss is out, you will wonder if that's the same business place. The moment the boss is there, everybody's eye service. There's a lot of eye service here. Lots and lots of eye service. I'm not saying it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, but I'm just saying that we must look at how our methods affect the kind of people that we are raising. The third reason why yelling doesn't work is because it affects your trust bond with your child significantly. Children will stop coming to you when they need help, because there's always going to be that hanging cloud of maybe they'll shout at me. If I tell my mom will shout at me. Kids are being abused, they can't talk because my mom will shout at me. So when the abuser says, if you tell your mom they're going to beat you, they're going to kill you, the child believes. Why? Because the child is coming from a hostile environment. So it's not hard to believe the abuser when the abuser says, if you go to your parents, this is what they'll do. So you have given your children enough evidence to help them believe what the abuser is saying. I'm not just talking theory here. I'm talking from several cases that I've had to work with, where parents are coming in tears to notice when they finally get to know about things that their kids have been hiding, that they could not afford to come to them directly and say, this is what I'm going through. This is the trouble I'm facing. This is where I've messed up. And I can't just tell you enough how costly it is today for parents, right? When they don't create the environment that can make their children safe enough to come to them with their questions, with their struggles, with their fears. If your child came to you to ask, Mama, what will happen if I had sex with a boy? Most parents will just lose it. What? What are you asking me? So you have started. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to replay a scene in my head, right? Most African parents, the more you ask questions like that, they just start assuming you started doing bad things, right? Oh, you have started. So you have started. You have started. Why are you asking me such a question? The question now becomes a reason for you to be yelled at. And apparently, they're not going to give you the answer. So what does that tell the child? I will never ask you a question again. So you have to, one of the roles of the parent is to create the environment, right, that encourages your child to open up. One of the things I said about the upcoming course is that if you really want to learn how to get your kids to open up, there is a way, right? Conversation with children is not just, there is a way. It requires skill. It requires skill. I remember, whenever I'm coaching parents who are trying to address maybe a child who is behaving inappropriately in a sexual way, one of the things I teach them is the fact that you cannot just go and bombard the child with questions like that. You're not going to get anything out of that session. You need to learn how to approach conversation with the child, and it differs depending on the age of the child. There is a way, there is a how. There is a how. There is a way you can talk to a child that can encourage the child to open up. So trust has a language as well. It has a language, it has an approach. Most parents just go with attack. Why did you take that thing? just the way you asked me. Even if I had to tell you the truth, I already know that if I try and say the truth here, they'll finish me. So sometimes the kid may not even have intended to lie, but just the way you attack, the way you approach the conversation, the child changes their mind instantly. I can't trust this. So just from the way I have not even told my parent what has happened, I just asked me the question, and the whole hell has broke loose. So the child knows that, okay, means I can't even tell you the rest. If you cannot handle this small question I asked you, I cannot tell you the rest. So it's all about approach. It's all about approach. Communication is a skill, and it's a skill that parents don't learn, right? We often even try to learn about communication in marriage, communication in other fields, at the workplace, as a professional. But many parents don't realize that there is communication for parenting. There is a way to talk to your children. There is a way to pass your message without being condescending, without attacking. Most of us are very good with the attack approach. And the attack approach brings what up? The shield. The moment you attack anyone, not even just children, the moment you come with an attack, what happens? The shield goes up. Their instinct is to protect themselves. And someone who's trying to protect themselves is not trying, to connect with you in that moment. That's not what they're trying. They're just trying to stay alive in that moment. So it damages trust between you and your child, damages your connection. Your kids will stop coming to you when they need help. And they will learn to avoid your voice instead of trusting it, right? Now, one of the things I've also noticed very common for parents who are chronic yellers is that you get to the point where your kids would rather avoid your company. Because they will always have a reason to yell at them. So they will rather just be far from you. So imagine that as your kids are growing up, they start always preferring to be away from you. Why? Mama, you would like to shout. Daddy's always shouting. Nobody likes to be around such a person because you would never know what you would do that would trigger the shouting. So your kids avoid you altogether. So it's a habit that you really, really want to work on. If you really want to build long-lasting relationship with your kids from childhood right up to adulthood, you want to work on your yelling. You want to work on your yelling. The next reason why yelling doesn't work is because it creates resistance. It doesn't create cooperation or encourages cooperation. It creates resistance. It means that it triggers rebellion instead of cooperation, right? It's going to trigger resentment. Children will begin to obey outwardly, but rebel inwardly, right? You see that frowning when they're going to do it. So you have shouted somebody that's finally come, but the child's face, so their legs are doing it, but you can tell that their heart, their head, their eyes, every other part is not doing it. Because the child is, you can see all over their body that they are doing what you are asking, but they are rebelling on the inside. It's obvious on their face, it's obvious in their attitude, and then that's not enough. Now you're going to start yelling about attitude, fix that your face, and all of that. So yes, you've commanded their physical to do what you want, but then there's no cooperation. So that tells you that if you're not there to force that moment, that child would not get to the point where they are able to move themselves to do it. So constant yelling will instead breed resentment, will breed an attitude of rebellion in your children. Because if you constantly need to force them to do what needs to be done, then you're not teaching your kids how to lead themselves. You're not teaching them how to lead themselves. And finally, it drains your health. Last week, if you missed a session of last week, go back and click the link and listen to it. I shared the story of a lady whose blood pressure struggles actually got better just by working on her yelling. I think she was in one of the fourth or fifth editions of the No Yelling Challenge. Just by working on her yelling, her doctor was like, what's happening? Why is your blood pressure suddenly responding to treatment? Just because she worked on the yelling. She worked on reducing significantly her yelling. So yelling, constant yelling, will put your body in a mode of constant stress. Every time you yell, that's why you get headaches. All right. Sometimes whenever I'm home, I have headaches. I'm always taking paracetamol. But you can stop the paracetamol if you just learn the skill that helps you communicate without needing to raise your voice. So constant yelling, this is science now. Constant yelling raises your stress level. And your stress levels is run by a hormone called cortisol. All right. Now that hormone, when it is in your body for a long period of time, it causes a lot of issues. It causes a lot of problems. It weakens your immune system. There's a lot of things that will come out from just constantly being in a mode of stress. So imagine that your kids put you constantly in a mode of stress. Why? Because you're always yelling. You say it's because they constantly give you reasons to yell. Those who are from emotional intelligence know that that's a very emotionally unintelligent statement to make, because you are in control of your actions. You can take control of your actions. No one can really make you do anything that you don't want to do. So constant yelling stresses you. And not just that, not just in the moment of yelling, but those who are yelling all the time find themselves, having that stress hormone constantly in their body. And that's not good when that happens for a long time. So imagine that you start yelling from the time your kids are toddlers. All right? And let's say you have 4 of them. So for the time they're toddlers, you start yelling. Because constantly, every time they're around, you're yelling. You're yelling. You yell for this, you yell for chores, you yell to go and bed, you yell to put up the TV, you yell to stop the fighting. Everything around you're just driving with yelling. Some parents are actually doing it that way. The bulk of their parenting is run by yelling. School morning, you are yelling. Oh, you're going to be late. You're always raising your voice. You are putting your body in a constant state of stress. And that's going to cause several health issues for you in the long run. So imagine the kids that are blessings, right? Because you don't have the skill to communicate, even when you're experiencing your frustration, you find yourself, is this something you're doing to yourself? Not your kid doing it to you. That's what we say, but that's not the truth. Your kids are not doing this to you because there is a higher way. There is a better way. There's a better way. So what should you do instead? One of the things you need to work on to reduce your yelling is to nurture your emotional intelligence, because yelling is driven by your emotions. It is an emotions-driven behavior. Frustration, irritation, disappointment, anger. Most of the time when right now, I would be shocked why I would just imagine if I start yelling right now. I'm in my office alone and I just start raising my voice. You would think I'm mad. So usually people who are yelling because something around them is triggering, you know, that reaction. Someone has irritated you, you're frustrated, you feel powerless, you are afraid. Yeah, parents yell when they are scared too. You are afraid of something that might happen, even though it has not happened. Those are all things that drive the yelling behavior. So emotional intelligence is crucial. You need to be able to work on your emotional intelligence so you can be able to manage. Because if you can manage the emotion, then you can better control the yelling. All right. So pausing to regulate your feelings so that you can respond. You can be able to actually talk instead of using high volume all the time, shouting all the time. So if you struggle with the emotions, with managing the emotions, you struggle with the yelling because they are connected. Now, the second thing you need to do differently, right, that actually works is effective communication. Of course, that's why we have the next course coming up. It begins on the 17th of March, the Effective Family Communication course with the 28 days no yelling challenge. Now, communication is not just putting words together and it out. That's not communication, right? That's talking. They're not really the same thing. Because the goal of communication is to influence the other person. That's the goal of communication, to influence the other person, right? With your message, either to get them to move, to get them to hear and believe something. That's the goal of communication. So when they say effective communication, it means that what you have communicated has brought forth the result that you intended for it to bring. So it's not just about talking, because if you were just about talking, then there will be no skill required here, right? Because several people can just put together a couple of words and then just say it. Now, there are words you will say to a child that will actually get them to close up. And in that same scenario, if you just rearrange how you put the words, maybe the way you ask the question. For example, you meet your child with something that they have stolen in their hands. Then parents like, you're still asking, who took my this and that? Some kids will even still lie, even with the evidence in their hands, will still lie. Because at that moment, it's all about survival. They don't know how they're going to explain the fact that they didn't take it, even though they have it in their hands. And they'll say, no, I just saw it on the floor and I picked it up. I'm not the one that took it. Just because of the manner of approach. Just because of the manner of approach. So, but if you can rephrase that, there are other ways to rephrase it and ask or inquire about what's happening right here. That can actually get the child to cooperate. But the manner of approach, right? How you communicate the words that you have to speak in that moment will make all the difference. And finally, connection. What actually does work is connection, because what the reason why the parent is yelling is because the parent wants to influence what the child is doing. You want your child to stop, you want your child to go and do, you want your child to hear something. Some parents even, when the child is coming to ask a question about something that they want to learn, they're trying to teach it by yelling. But they're not telling you last time you came and asked, didn't I explain to you what it was? And you are now explaining again with yelling. The first time you explain, the child didn't hear. The second time the child has come back as the same question, you are now explaining with yelling, making it even worse. So the child can't hear you. The child couldn't hear you the first time. It's not with yelling that your child eventually gets to hear you. So connection is so important because, it actually paves the way for influence. What you actually want to accomplish as a parent on your journey is to build your level of influence. Influence is superior to control. They are not the same thing. Yelling is control. Effective communication is influence. They're not the same thing. One influence is so powerful. Why? Because this is what you need as a parent to build. You need to build this with your child, because this is what helps you in their later years. Many parents are so focused on the now, the toddler years, the middle-aged years. There's another higher level coming. And at that level, where your child has size size advantage, your child is becoming further and further away from your should I say dependency, where they become more and more independent. I think that's a better way to say it. They're becoming more and more independent. They are becoming more, they're growing more and more into the stage where they can eventually be on their own. That's where you're going to need influence. They don't need you to feed them. They don't need you to bathe and clothe them. They don't need you to, maybe take them to school. They can go by themselves. The more independent your child becomes, the more you're going to need leverage on your influence to be able to help you guide and train your child at that stage. It's easy to use force and control when they are young, but as they grow older, it becomes obsolete. It gets to the point where it's no longer working. That's why the majority of the parents who are coming to complain, oh, the child is no longer listening. They are parents of teenagers, because that is a whole other level. They're parents of teenagers. Because at that stage, your child has realized that they really don't have to listen to you. They can do what you're forcing them to do at the house, but when they go out there, they're going to do what they want, because at that point you're not there. And that is the point where you need influence, because influence works even in your absence. Influence works even when you are away. That is the power, the superpower that you really want to build as a parent. Influence. All right. And that does not come from a habit like yelling. You can never build influence if you're a chronic yeller. You want to build true influence with your child. Connection. That's the way to go. And influence or yelling weakens connection. So parenting is not just about raising your voice, it's about raising your children, right, with connection, with respect, with emotional intelligence. So yelling is a toxic parenting habit. It's not a must. You must not yell. You can raise your children with little or no yelling. It's very possible. All right, that's why I'm inviting you to sign up for the Effective Family Communication course. Of course, for those on the DR tribe, that's free, but for every other person, you have to sign up. You don't want to miss this course. We're going to look at the reason we changed the heading to from parenting to families, because we're going to look at it from not just the parenting perspective, but also the marriage perspective, the family dynamics perspective. Because we realize that most of the people I get inbox, I receive quite a few people to talking about marriage issues, and you realize that at the root of it is just communication, how to get your message across without being demeaning, without being disrespectful, without all of these other things. That's actually a challenge for many people, because for most of us, communication was not taught. I'm teaching my kids how to communicate from their early ages, so you can imagine what that would be like for them when they are adults, right? I'm teaching them things that I was never taught. And that's what we are doing to equip parents who are on the 1 year program. We are helping you teach your children things that you were never taught, that gives them a superior advantage. A child who can communicate has a superior advantage, because communication is the lifeblood of every and any relationship. Once you can communicate, you will notice that your relationships begin to thrive. Whether it's friendship or a sibling relationship, if you can communicate, if you learn the skill of communication, it's a skill that blesses you on multiple fronts. So I look forward to having you there, right? If you're here, let me hear from you, right? Are you coming from the 1 year? Are you from here from the DR tribe? Are you here from the Pui community? We have so many communities that are open. From the purposeful parenting communities, I think there's 1 to 3. So whichever of these forums you're coming from, let me hear in the comments, and please invite someone else to sign up. This course is going to be a game changer, particularly for those who have been yelling. We have the 28-day yelling challenge as part of this course, where you're going to get help on exactly what to do. Oh, yeah, DR tribe. Welcome here, Mama. On Dr. Newman, Dr. Ida, you're welcome. On exactly what to do to help you break the cycle of yelling. All right. The reason why you cannot just maybe read a book and then you need a community, because it's a habit, and habits don't just break overnight. A habit is something that you've done over and over and over and over. And to break it, you also need to practice the right thing over and over and over and over. And when you're doing it in the midst of a community, it actually empowers you on the days when you feel discouraged. So that's the essence, that's the strength of the no yelling challenge, because you're going to be in the midst of other parents who are also working on their yelling, and you're going to struggle together, but also triumph together. So I look forward to having you there. Great. Thank you so much. Is there any question? Feel free to ask any questions you might have. I'm going to give 3 minutes to answer questions before I shut down. Are there any questions, please? Any questions, any concerns, any comments? Were you raised by a yeller? I'm sure the answer should be a resounding yes. I've hardly met adults who grew up here in particular, right? Who were raised by parents who never yelled. I've met a few, but compared to those who are the contrary, the difference is really wide. Most of us were raised by parents who, my dad was not a yeller, and I grew up mostly with him. But I was also in contact with members of my family who were, chronic yellers. Can yell for Africa, as they say. All right. So even if you were not raised by yelling parents, sometimes just growing up in an environment where people are always yelling, it actually affects you as well. It's difficult to make the other people around us not to yell. Yeah, It's actually hard. But one thing I've noticed is that one of the ways to disarm a yeller is by staying calm. It's hard. It's just like trying to argue with someone who's not ready to argue with you. All right, arguing with someone who's not ready to argue with you. I remember when I started working on my yelling, my spouse, and he's giving permission to share his stories. Right, I tell him always, I share your stories, and he's like, oh please, parents need to learn. So he's an advocate for me sharing his story so the parents can learn from it. Now, when I became a purposeful parent, one of the things I started doing was to work on my yelling. And just like you're mentioning now in the comments, my husband was struggling at that time to work on his own yelling because he too was raised by a super yeller. And yelling for him was like an instant, he just switches and he will yell at the top of his voice, so scary. So when you start working on your own yelling, you become more aware of every other person's yelling. So I became so aware of his yelling, and over the years, he too has been doing work on his yelling to the point where the kids will come for a family meeting and tell him, Daddy was yelling a lot. Daddy is now, but Daddy is no longer yelling. The kids are the ones, not me, the kids were the ones giving him his report to say, hey, Dad, we've noticed that you're not yelling as much as you used to before. Because I had become so much of a non-yeller that his own yelling became so pronounced. So it's hard to work on your yelling when you're with a spouse that is a yeller, because their yelling now becomes so obvious to you and also to the kids. But one thing I can assure you is, in particular in the cases where the other spouse is not willing to work on it at all, is the fact that yes, because you are aware of the consequences of the constant yelling, one of the ways that you can help, a person like that is to just create space for them, right? And never give up, trying to give them, go to, instead of yelling, do this. Not in the moment though, but these conversations that you have about what you do when you feel like yelling. Like I tell women mostly, because mostly are women who ask me this question: what if you have a spouse who doesn't want to learn anything? I tell them, even if you have a spouse who doesn't want to learn, still share what you're learning. Don't share it as a means of correcting them, like in the moment. So don't yell. Instead of yelling, you should not yell, because in the moment, no, that would be offensive, right? But later on, at some other time, bring it up. Talk about what you are doing and how it's working for you. Because even the Bible says that faith comes by hearing. The more you hear, whether you want it or not, it will influence your thinking. Particularly share the things that you do that helps you resist the urge to yell, like walking away, like taking a deep breath. And what you are doing, if you are really practicing these things yourself, I promise you it will rub off on those around you. I shared the story with the DR tribe about how, I've watched my nanny validate my children's emotions just from seeing me and hearing me do it over. She's been with me for a year. Just by seeing me do it over and over and over, I witnessed the moment where I heard her validating emotions, and she's never taken a course on emotional intelligence. Just by watching me do it, just by seeing me consistently respond to my children's emotions, to their crying in that way, she was able to give them the same thing. It just came out of her. So, how to really change the behavior around us, especially when you want to form a support system? Be patient. As much as you can, be patient, but don't give up. Right? Keep practicing what you know to do, and eventually it will rub off. I can't tell you it will take 1 year or two, but keep doing it. Right? I've been on this journey now. I think for my husband, actively, I would say like maybe 7 years. For him, like him really doing the work, and it's still an unraveling process. So keep working on it, all right? And don't give up. Don't give up, because it's worth it. Because it's worth it. But also notice even the small changes that they are trying to make. You need to pay attention and also encourage them. I noticed that you did something I usually yell for, but you didn't yell. Wow, that was good. Give that positive feedback to the other person who is still struggling, who is still working on their yelling. Those positive feedbacks actually add up to keep the person encouraged to doing the right thing. But most importantly, don't relent your own effort working on your own self. Thank you so much for that comment, Dr. Ida. I look forward to our next Thursday live. Let me know in the comments if there's something you'd like to hear me speak on. We are focusing on communication this month, and maybe the first week of the month of April. We're going to talk about communication and family dynamics on most of our Thursdays. If you want to hear me talk about something, feel free to share with me in the comments or send me a chat. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's getting dark. I look forward to seeing you here again next Thursday. Please share, invite someone else to watch. Take care and bye.